Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And this is Lorenzo.
And welcome to Hacking Your Leadership, a Spreaker Prime podcast.
Thanks to all our Patreon members and our loyal listeners for tuning in today. Before we begin, here's a short message from a sponsor.
No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about the return to work process.
That's a hot topic right now.
It really is. It really is. There was an article published on LinkedIn a couple of days ago by Jordan Dahl, who's the entrepreneurship editor, and she kind of detailed through a lot of the return to work plans from a lot of companies. And I'll be honest, it really surprised me, the companies that have decided to move forward with a 100% offsite, almost, sell the building mentality versus the ones who have said, business is normal. We're gonna be healthy and we're gonna keep you safe. But as far as the working environment and the location, plan on looking to what 2019 was, because that's approximately what it's going to look like in 2021 or towards the latter half of 2021. And then there are some companies who have kind of gone a hybrid route or different routes. But again, it's the types of companies that I'm seeing who you would think like, oh, you hear something like, Salesforce or REI, that's the sell the building mentality and everybody's remote. And then you hear something like Amazon and Google who are saying, nope, we are back in the office sometime this year. And that's the part that surprised me, is like you kind of think these, kind of the techie companies, the ones who maybe employ a younger workforce might be the ones more inclined to say, we're going remote permanently. And the ones who might have a longer culture and multi-generational workforce or more multi-generational workforce saying, we're going back into the office. But it doesn't seem to be that simple. It seems to be that really every company is kind of choosing a different path and doing what works right for them. On the surface, that seems like it should be what happens, that every company does what's right for them. But I don't know. I mean, there's some inherent pitfalls associated with this when it comes to what employees are expecting out of their organizations. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that obviously some of this is industry specific in regards to certain organizations and companies where there's kind of a requirement of a physical attendance to a degree.
Sure.
I think that there's a mixed bag of results from what I'm hearing and reading in regards to some places saying that there's been more productivity or at least sustained productivity from people working at home. And then I've heard other articles and mentions of a complete lack of productivity or a decrease in productivity as a result of not having more structure to the work itself. So I think that it is really interesting as these organizations are making these decisions, because I believe, and I've signed up to be in retail leadership, so I get energy, I get development, I get connection around being people, around being around teams, around being around the community, around the public. Like, I get a lot of personal energy and excitement when I'm in those spaces. And I also know that I've had also many times where I've been in a meeting and I'm like, this could have been a Zoom call or a conference call, or in some instances it could have been an email or a text message. And then I've been in rooms of meetings where, as a result of people having to sit across the table, the idea or the strategy was so much significantly better as a result of that I was so grateful to have, that type of a space to be in. So it really is an interesting situation that's going on right now. Obviously, if you look at kind of just skimming the headlines across, a lot of people are saying like, it's just working from home gives me flexibility. It allows me to spend time, in different ways that I hadn't seen before. And like a lot of that stuff is good stuff. And I think it is kind of like the old book, like the, chicken soup for the soul element of, all of a sudden, when you spend more time in your own space, you tend to maybe have a little bit more gratitude, or you focus on maybe hobbies or passions or relationships and things like that. But at the same exact time, there's a lot of things that happen in physical workplaces that drive innovation, that drive productivity, that create non-formal or informal collaboration that just doesn't happen if two people aren't in the same meeting room together, walking by each other in the hallway, are wearing the same shirt that day, and they kind of laugh about it, and then they build a connection, and then all of a sudden they find out they're working on two projects where they can find an efficiency in the entire workflow. So like those are things that I think a lot of organizations are really thinking about, that have been maybe even core tenets of how they've built culture in their companies.
I think back to my I spent about 3 years in corporate HR for Best Buy many years ago, and my office was basically in the corporate headquarters in Minnesota. And for anybody who doesn't know, the office is set up, or the corporate home office is set up in such where there's this almost like center quad area that has multiple buildings going off of this center quad area. And in order to get from one building to another, you have to walk through that center quad in order to get from one place to another. And because meetings are set up all over the place, that is a huge thoroughfare pass-through of activity and conversations. And I found myself getting more out of my job when between meetings, I wasn't sitting at a desk or at a cubicle. I'd go down to that center area and I'd find a table and a chair and just sit there and see who walked by, the conversations that I had, the interactions that I had, the business contacts that I made, and the projects that I was asked to be part of, just by virtue of the fact that I happened to be in that right place at the right time, were so powerful and so beneficial to me that's what I found myself doing over and over again when I was there, as opposed to sitting at a desk. And so you're spot on when you say that the value of just being around people, not just to an organization, but to an individual, the individual value that I felt being able to be around people because I just happened to be in the room, I think can't be discounted. And when you talk about, if you're in a lone wolf kind of job, a person who's an individual salesperson whose, productivity is measured on how much revenue you bring in from your clients, B2B kind of stuff, then maybe that's less of a need. Maybe you need to be in the presence of your clients. And I get that. If you're not in that kind of an environment, if your productivity and your projects and the initiatives that you can spearhead or be a part of are directly related to the rooms that you're in, to the people that you happen to meet or happen to have a conversation with, I think this can be really career limiting if you're in an environment where you are a 100% remote environment. And so I just think it's a double-edged sword. I think if as an individual, I can't just look at what's best for me in terms of a work-life balance. I have to look at what's best for me in work-life balance combined with what's best for me in a career advancement standpoint, knowing that there's also that third arm of the company that I work for is going to be looking at what's best for their perceived productivity and getting the most out of what they're paying me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's really important to kind of call out. We talked last year about organizations and kind of layoffs and furlough and these types of things where at the end of the day, there were really tough decisions that had to be made around, having the companies survive is critical to then not only keeping some careers, but having the potential for future careers. And it's very simple, it's very much the same in this space where the company surviving, the company innovating, the company building business models is critical to maintaining the future of the organizations. And while there are definitely some benefits, I'm sure, to individuals and team members and the ability to work from home and some of that, I truly believe that a lot of organizations are going to have to find some kind of a balance where I think that there are just certain parts of jobs where you physically have to be there. I think when it comes to innovation specifically, I just think about raise your hand with the level of engagement that you have on a Zoom call or a WebEx call or a FaceTime call versus being in a room with other leaders and other people that can, observe you. You can be a part of the dialogue. You kind of have to pay attention. I think we've gotten really good at multitasking while also getting work done at home on a computer and on these calls. And I think that takes away from the intent of the attention needed to really listen and to poke holes into ideas and to have a very kind of refined opinion on the work that needs to be done. I just think that that's the reality. So again, I think that there are many jobs that can be done at home. There are many jobs that provide you a sense of ability to be successful and work from home. But I think that cultures of organizations that do the best work, that are not only kind of maybe diverse or inclusive in name, but have that element from a physical standpoint, I think those organizations, they need that to really be successful in the long term. So even if they do move to a lot more work from home work, I think you would see pockets of those teams start to show up physically again, maybe in smaller buildings or smaller sections. But I think it's a necessity for a lot of organizations. Just that human interaction, that human connection is needed in business to truly kind of bubble up the best ideas.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about multitasking, because we all think we're better at it than we really are, because at the end of the day, our focus gets pulled to something, and it gets pulled away from whatever it is we should be in. And while I can look back at the meetings that I was in terms of the rooms that I was in, the physical meetings I was in pre-pandemic, and I wouldn't have even thought about getting my cell phone out and reading an email on my phone while someone was talking or responding to a text message. But I've done that 100 times on Zoom calls where my face is just one tiny thumbnail on everybody's display amongst 30 people. And I can very easily kind of look my eyes down at the phone that's in front of me, and no one will ever know that I was doing it. But it's not about whether or not somebody knows I've done it. It's about, what did I miss in that moment that I was doing it? And I can tell myself all I want to that I didn't miss anything, that I was fine, that I could just do both things. But you and I both know that's not the case. That over time, that leads to what you just said, missing out on what's going on, the ability to poke holes in something or to add value to the situation. And that's how productivity declines. That's how relationships decline. It also makes me really think about, there was a video that kind of went viral maybe 4 or 5 years ago of Simon Sinek talking about the millennial workforce and how relationships and trust are built in those little interactions that occur prior to the meeting, and how it's like, when you get into a meeting, you take your cell phone out and you start playing on it and looking at different things, and then the facilitator of the meeting says, all right, we're starting now, and then you put your cell phone away, right? And he talks about how, no, the companies that have healthy culture are the ones where when you walk in the room, the moment you walk in the room, the cell phone goes away, because those 5 or 6 minutes between you walking in the room and the meeting beginning, that's when the relationships happen. That's when the interactions occur, where you talk about what's going on in someone else's life and what's going on in your life. And when you can make personal connections, when you find commonalities between people who might not look the same as you, but you have a lot more in common than you think. And that's when efforts for diversity and inclusion get realized in terms of, sustaining themselves, because the relationships happen amongst people who normally wouldn't interact with each other outside of work. And now they're finding jumping off points to create relationships, which lead to better productivity and a more kind of centric work culture around the importance of those relationships, because we all know we get our best work done when we're surrounded by people we genuinely care about. The last thing I'll say is that I think back to, this is a leadership podcast, obviously. I think back to the implementation of the results-only work environment ROW at a previous organization, and how it was a really great example of what we're seeing right now, because we're not talking about an entire workforce going remote. We're talking about an individual organization saying, all right, everybody, in this corporate office here, results-only work environment is what we're doing. You work amongst your teams to decide how much time you need to be at the office versus how much time you don't need to be at the office. And there was a huge gap, a huge delta between the teams that really flourished under this and the teams that really did not. And the difference was leadership. So we're talking about not cultural differences amongst organizations, but within the same organization, just the different teams. The teams reporting, this is amazing, I love this results-only work environment, versus other teams saying, this is terrible, we're getting nothing done. And it was mainly leaders coming back saying, I love this, because my team we all agreed as a team that we're going to come into the office on Monday morning for 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever it is, and then the rest of the week was going to be pretty much remote. But if something came up where we had to be together again, we knew we were going to have to be together again. And then other team leaders were saying things like, I can't get my team to come into the office. I said I would send out an email saying we're going to all get together next Monday, and I get half my team responding back saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy that day, or I can't be in the office because I have this going on instead. And it's like they felt like their hands were being tied by this. And there was no kind of prescribed way of implementing this. It was, this is what it is, work amongst your teams. And so this kind of like huge gap amongst what leaders were showing the relationship was already there with their teams, and therefore this program worked really well, versus what leaders were really struggling because they didn't have the leadership already. in order to kind of get their team kind of coalesced around a single, goal and have that culture, it was just mind blowing to see in person. So on an entire workforce basis, this is happening, and there are leaders who are going, yes, please, we need to get back in the office. And they're saying that because they don't have the ability to lead a remote team.
I'm sorry, I was checking my phone. I think I heard Simon Sinek and something about leadership there.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. No, I was talking about how it's important to not be looking at your phone when we're talking. Oh, yeah. Do you want me to repeat that for you?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And I think that's actually what I think we will see a little bit of going forward is like that leaders, could have some dialogue and conversation here about what parts of the role or the job can be done at home, what parts of the role of the job should be done in the office. But I also think that some organizations, while in theory, you might think that some progressive organizations would be the first ones to say, we're going to keep everybody at home, may also be on a 20-year lease of a $1 billion, corporate office and campus.
Yep.
That they can't just say, you know what, we've decided to just basically make that a ghost town and let everybody work from home. Because there are organizations that, as a result of maybe where they were at, what they had, the capability of what they could do, they decided to remove that cost and that overhead of having a giant office or campus, where some organizations just can't do that. So it becomes not a great idea to then have people work from home and have all of this overhead in a space that you can't utilize for the means of creating those informal, connections amongst the employees. So again, I think that there's more to this than just the idea of whether leaders of an organization would say this is the right move for us or not. I think that a lot of those types of things are kind of being brought into the front in regards to making decisions. But yeah, I think that we start to continue to move more and more into some elements of the hybrid workforce. Those percentages are probably going to get, maybe compounded a little bit more recently as a result of having some kind of beta testing of working from home. But I think that still a lot of organizations, that not only do they want, but they need that element of physicality in regards to their workforce and their people working together.
I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a word from a sponsor.
The 1 minute hack.
For this 1 minute hack, here's what I'd like for you to do. I want you to consider two things. Number one, as a leader and as a leader of people, you may have absolutely no influence or a capability to make a decision around people either working from home or working from an office. So I think it's really important to lead some dialogue with your team around both of those things, around the reason that an organization would feel that this would be appropriate or to go back to an office or to work from home. But I think the dialogue that needs to be had with your teams is such that people can start to think about all of the layers of complexity in making a decision like this for an organization. I think that's really important. Again, whether or not you come back to an office or you work from home, helping your people think about this, wrap their head around it, and understand how and why these decisions are usually made, I think is really helpful in their overall development and perspective. And I think elements of gratitude as well, that the organization would take all these things into account. The second thing is that if you do have the ability to have some influence on whether or not people work at home or go back to an office or a place of business, you should really start to think about what are those things that can be done at home? What parts of their roles would make it so that they can get the work done while also staying connected to the team? And I would start to think about how you want to layer in the ability for those informal connections to happen. And don't just do Zoom coffee hours or whatever, like actual physical times you could bring your teams together, whether that's once a week, twice a week, every other week. Like definitely think about how you would strategize the ability as a leader to make sure that your productivity is good, that you're exceeding expectations, but that you're also building in times for a human connection amongst your team to allow for them to build their relationships with one another and to build their relationships with you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's a great 1 minute hack. I think the organizations who are the most successful here are definitely going to be the ones who don't think it's an all or nothing thing. It's the ones who think I need to understand that my people need to be met where they are, the business needs need to be met where it is, and one isn't more important than the other. You have to have both. You have to be able to deliver the results that you've been entrusted to deliver as a leader. Your people also need to feel supported by you as their leader, and whatever you can do to kind of thread that needle. And it's going to look different for each team. Every leader who's listening right now, it's going to look different for your team, and it might look different in terms of what the organization tells you are requisites for this. Like this might be dictated to you. but how you show up as a leader in terms of that support and how you can make those two elements work together are going to be directly related to what your team takes out of it, thinking, all right, I have Lorenzo's support, I have Chris's support as my leader, regardless of what this looks like coming from the broader organization.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.